All right, and we see Christ was hated by his brethren, just as Abel was hated by his brother Cain. Christ was hated by his brethren. If we have a look at John chapter 1, John 1, 10 and 11, it says, he was in the world, this is speaking of Christ, and the world was made by him, and the world knew him not. He came unto his own, and his own received him not. Right? His brethren rejected him. He was hated without a cause, just exactly the same as Abel was hated without a cause. He was hated, in fact, because of his godliness and his goodness, just the same as Abel was. Let's have a look at Isaiah 53. It gives us a picture of what's to come, and a prophecy of Christ coming, and it says in verse 3, he is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and we hid as it were our faces from him. He was despised and we esteemed him not. Surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yes, we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquity. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. It goes on to say, he was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before a shearers is dumb, so he openeth not his mouth. Talking about Christ and what he suffered and how his brethren rejected him. How complete was their rejection? Well, every one of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, tells us about the crucifixion, how that they rejected him to the point of murdering him, killing him. Abel was murdered by his brother. Genesis 4:8 says that Cain rose up and killed his brother Abel. Abel's life was taken and his blood was shed. Verse 10 said that his blood cries out from the ground. And Christ was murdered by his brethren too. If we look in Matthew 26:47 to 68, it tells us how he was killed. He was condemned by his very own blood relations. And so he's a perfect fulfillment of the type of Abel. His life was taken and his blood was shed on the cross of Calvary. Matthew, Mark, Luke and John all tell us about the crucifixion, and the crucifixion makes it perfectly clear that Christ's blood was shed as he died for us upon the cross. And then number 6, page 2, Cain was cursed and separated for his crime. Genesis 4:11 and 12 tells us that God punished him. Abel's blood cried out to God, and God reacted to that by punishing Cain and cursing him and separating him for his crime. And we understand this: mankind, by their continued crucifying again of Christ, by rejecting Christ, mankind are cursed and separated from God. We are dead in trespasses and sins, and unless mankind repents and turns back to God, he will die in his sins and he'll be eternally separated from God. Now, note this: the Jews, Jesus' actual earthly brethren, said, his blood be upon us and on our children. When Pilate brought Jesus out to the people and he said, I find no fault in him, they said, crucify him. And Pilate said, well, I don't find any fault in him, it'll be on you. And they said, his blood be upon us and on our children. And history has certainly seen this happen. This is rung out through history over the generations. The Jews saying, his blood be upon us and upon our children. And then it says, Abel's blood spoke. Genesis 4:10. God said, Abel's blood cries out to me from the ground. And it's interesting to note, if we go over to Hebrews 11:4, it talks about Abel. And it's an interesting thing that it says about it. Hebrews 11:4. Right, by faith Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, by which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and by it he being dead yet speaketh. Now it said his blood spoke and called on God to exact vengeance and justice and judgment. So Abel's blood spoke, and now in Hebrews 11:4 it says Abel still speaks. In fact, Abel's blood still cries out for vengeance, justice and judgment. But what about Christ? How does this relate to him? Well, it's very interesting. In Hebrews 12:24 it takes this up and it says, and Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling, that's Christ's blood, that speaketh better things than that of Abel. Right, Christ's blood speaks on behalf of all mankind, and it still speaks eternally. Right, it's interesting though, Abel's blood spoke of vengeance, justice and judgment, but it says Christ's blood speaks of better things. Now, what are the better things that Christ's blood speaks of? It speaks not of vengeance or justice and judgment in that sense, but it speaks of love, mercy, truth and grace. And that's what Christ's blood speaks of. Love, mercy, truth and grace. Better things than the blood of Abel. But let us understand that if this voice of Christ's blood speaking to mankind is ignored, one day it will speak of vengeance, of wrath and judgment. Right. Abel brought his offering and he offered it upon an altar of earth. Now, he might have made an altar of rocks, but the principle is just the same. If we look over at Noah in Genesis 8, we see that he built an altar, and we're not sure what it was built of, but it was either rocks or dirt or earth, but the principle's the same. When Abel was slain by his brother, his blood was shed on the ground, on the earth, the very altar that he had sacrificed on. And so with Christ, he was sacrificed on the cross by his brethren and shed his blood upon the altar for us. When Christ shed his blood, he was upon the cross, and so that became the altar that he was sacrificed on. And so we see in Abel a wonderful type, and we see in Christ the wonderful fulfillment. And we see exactly as Paul says in Hebrews, he uses the word better when talking about Christ. Better than Abel, better than all the patriarchs of the past, better. And he's right to say it. It's no wonder he uses the word better in Hebrews 12:24 and right through the book of Hebrews. And so that type of Abel is one of the first types in the scriptures, and it does us good to look at that one and see it. Now, types can be taken too far and they can be taken out of context, but if we see someone in the Old Testament and we see something about them and say, boy, that fits so well with Christ in the New Testament, and then we look in the New Testament and we find it fulfilled exactly, we can be confident that that's the Old Testament type is like a prophecy pointing ahead to Christ. Now, there are many of them in the Old Testament, and each one has to be fulfilled. Now, the fulfillment is always much better than the type, of course, but it often does our hearts good to look in the Old Testament and see these types in the Old Testament, and then look ahead to Christ and see that he fulfills them so perfectly. And so we go back to Genesis and to see what happened with Cain and Abel, and we see that Cain murdered his brother Abel, and we've looked at that. But have we thought about the implications of that, really? Think of the implications of this. God had promised Adam and Eve that the seed of the woman would defeat Satan. Genesis 3:15 says, "And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel." Now, Adam and Eve understood this to mean that there was coming someone of the seed of the woman that would defeat Satan. So who would they expect it to be? They would expect it to be their son. And then Eve had a son, and they named him Cain, and saw him as possibly the seed. And she then had another son, Abel, and he also could be this special one. Now they would be looking for this one that would do it. They knew that they had rebelled against God, but they knew that of the seed of the woman would come a saviour. And so they had Cain, and they said, perhaps this is him. And then they had Abel, and they said, well, maybe this is a special one. And then they both come to sacrifice to God, and it's clear that Cain is not really in fellowship with God, but Abel is. So it would appear that Abel could be this special seed. And Adam and Eve would be looking at Abel and saying, maybe this is where our salvation will come from. Then Cain kills Abel, and Eve is left with no prospective seed to reconcile them to God. She's not to know that that seed is far away in history. She would be expecting it to be there, one of her sons. Then she has another son, and she names him Seth. Now, it's very significant that she names him Seth, because his name means substituted. And it's often the case that some special man is named significantly in regard to a certain doctrine. And that man comes over time to represent that doctrine. And this is true in Seth's case. Seth, his name means substituted, and he becomes the man that represented this idea of substitution, substitutionary atonement. He is a type of Christ. He takes Abel's place. He's instead of Abel as the promised seed, and is indeed in the godly line. If we look in Luke and we look at the godly line to Christ, we find that Seth is there in his place. And it is through this line that the promised seed did actually come. Though Eve didn't realise it, Seth could not actually be the promised seed, because he still had Adam's sin imputed to him. And so she didn't realise that he couldn't be the seed, but he was the seed of the woman and the seed of the man as well. And this disqualified him. Eve hadn't thought of the virgin birth, obviously, back at that stage. But it's interesting that they named him substituted, Seth. And there's another aspect of Seth's substitution. Cain was the firstborn son and the natural heir of the birthright, which was Adam's. He was the eldest son. The birthright passed from the father to the eldest son. It should have been through Cain that the promised seed would come. But like Adam, Cain rebelled against God and became a type of sinful, rebellious, God-rejecting mankind. He became a symbol of all that is of man, as opposed to God. This made it clear to Adam and Eve that Cain could not be the promised seed. Then Seth was born, and he became a substitute not only for Abel, but also for Cain. And so in every way, Seth was exactly as his name said, a substitute. The promised seed that was to come was to do battle with Satan and defeat him. And the promised seed was to provide salvation from God's judgment. And this is very interesting. Seth was in fact the one through whom all this was done. He was in that godly line. He was the beginning after Adam of that godly line through whom all of the promises of God would be fulfilled and through who the seed of the woman would come. And we see this first of all at the flood. Now Noah was in Seth. He was in the godly line from Seth at the time of the flood. And Noah provided salvation for the world from God's judgment. Of course, mankind rejected it, but it was provided. Salvation was provided, and it was available to all. When Noah made the ark, it wasn't nearly full when 8 people were on the ark, was it? There was room for all who would come, but mankind rejected the salvation that God provided. And then Christ, just like Noah, was in Seth. Christ came through this godly line and he provided salvation from God's eternal judgment. Of course, mankind still rejects it, but it is open to all. It's not God's will that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. Christ died for all. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life. Now, note, however, that some were saved from the flood. What was different about those that were saved from the flood to those that were lost? The difference was that they believed what God had said and they got on the ark. Now that's all they had to do. Those that believed were saved, those that didn't believe were condemned. And some are being eternally saved now. Who is being saved now? Exactly the same, those who believe. Those who reject Christ are condemned eternally. With the birth and the naming of Seth, the doctrine of substitution is quickly becoming a major doctrine, and it goes on to become more and more of a major doctrine as we look through the scriptures, but we'll leave it there now.